We're always told that comparing ourselves to others is this modern disease. Like, it's just this toxic habit we absolutely have to break. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if this constant, relentless comparison isn't actually a glitch in our psychology, but one of the most profound mysteries of human consciousness? In this, we're embarking on a deep psychological exploration. We're stepping completely away from that superficial self-help advice, and we're looking directly at the ancient hidden machinery of our own minds. I really want you to let the existential weight of this question sink in for a second. Why do we never feel like enough? I mean, no matter what we achieve, no matter how much praise we get, why is there almost always this lingering sense of lack? This unshakable feeling that we're somehow falling behind the people around us? Okay, let's actually dive into this. We usually just assume that our feelings of inadequacy are this toxic byproduct of modern social media, right? It's just envy, and we feel incredibly guilty for it. But the psychological reality is so much more complex. This urge to compare is actually an ancient, hardwired survival mechanism, deeply embedded within our consciousness. We don't do it because we're weak, we do it because we're human. Part 1. The architecture of status, how the brain measures worth. To really understand this, we have to strip away modern society and look at the evolutionary blueprint of human emotion. Listen to this insight from evolutionary psychologists Tooby and Cosmides. They point out that our emotions didn't just magically appear out of nowhere. They actually evolved for their adaptive value in dealing with fundamental life tasks. And crucially, one of those fundamental tasks is dealing with a failure-driven loss in status. So status anxiety isn't some modern character flaw. It's a hardwired life-or-death alarm system. In our ancestral past, falling to the bottom of the social hierarchy could mean exclusion from the group, which back then literally meant death. Psychologist Richard Lazarus broke down how our brains assess these threats through what he called the structural dimensions of emotion. He laid out components like goal relevance, ego involvement, and blame or credit. The absolutely crucial point here is that our feelings of shame and pride aren't just these vague, floating moods. They're complex, split-second calculations of our ego relative to our environment. Shame is literally the psychological alarm going off that we're failing to live up to our ego ideal, while pride is the signal that our identity in the group is enhanced. We're constantly doing this invisible math. And this comparative instinct, it is unbelievably ancient. It's rooted in what biologists call sense-making, which is the primitive capacity of a complex system to assess its environment to promote self-maintenance. This is an instinct that's present in everything from bacteria all the way up to humans. Just think about that for a second. The exact same biological imperative that makes a microbe swim toward food is what makes us obsess over a coworker's promotion. Even a single-celled organism has to constantly assess its environment to figure out if it's safe or in danger. In humans, that environment just happens to be incredibly complex, deeply physiological, and intensely social. Which brings us to part 2, mirrors and the mind, the burden of self-awareness. You see, we aren't just biological machines surviving in a physical environment. We carry a unique, extremely heavy burden. We have human consciousness. So, when a human being looks in the mirror, what are we actually looking at? Are we just seeing a physical reflection of flesh and bone, or are we encountering a deeply complex psychological construct? Think about how this builds across the timeline of awareness. We start way back with that primitive bacterial sense-making. Then, millions of years ago, basic perceptual experience emerges in early animals. Next comes primate development, where mere self-recognition begins. And finally, the human cognitive revolution. This is where we developed reflective self-evaluation and what philosophers call second-order volitions. In plain English, that means we don't just want things, we evaluate and judge our own desires. We don't just want a slice of cake, we feel guilty about wanting this slice of cake. It's the uniquely human burden of looking at ourselves from the outside, through the eyes of the world. This is exactly why Gordon Gallup's famous mirror recognition tests are so vital. Passing the mirror test isn't just about realizing, oh hey, there's a smudge of paint on my forehead. It's the psychological gateway. It links the ability to recognize oneself with the capacity to feel complex, socially dependent emotions like shame, embarrassment, and envy. The exact moment you recognize yourself is the moment you realize you can be seen, measured, and judged by others. Part 3. The intersubjective self. Why I requires you. This takes us right into a profound philosophical realization about the very nature of our identity. The philosopher P.F. Strawson brilliantly captured the core of our psychological reality. He argued, one can only self-ascribe states of consciousness if one is capable of ascribing them to others. Think about how radical that idea is. Self-awareness is entirely impossible in a vacuum. Your sense of self is completely dependent on recognizing that other minds exist around you. Developmental psychologists actually talk about an early dualist state, where a newborn cannot distinguish between themselves and their environment. There is no I yet. The concept of the differentiated self, the actual I, only emerges by recognizing the other. It's a concept called intersubjectivity. Basically, the other is the only metric by which the self can actually be defined. Philosophers point out this complex-sounding but absolutely fascinating premise. The idea of a predicate is correlative with a range of distinguishable individuals. Okay, what does that mean in everyday terms? It means we literally only understand who we are by observing who we are not. Comparison isn't a glitch of our minds, it's the very foundation of how we formulate an identity. You only know you're successful because you see someone else struggling. You only know your status by mapping the hierarchy around you. Part 4. The illusion of arrival, the paradox of well-being. Now, this psychological architecture leads us into a terrible trap when it comes to our everyday desires and modern anxieties. So, what actually happens when you finally get everything you want? You get the promotion, the house, the status you've been chasing. Why doesn't the comparison engine just turn off? Why doesn't the insecurity vanish? Well, standard theories of well-being clash dramatically with our psychological reality. The present desire theory says fulfilling a want should bring peace, but as we all know, it rarely brings lasting peace. The comprehensive desire theory suggests total life satisfaction is achievable, but human beings constantly recalibrate their baseline of what feels normal. And the informed desire theory shows that even when we get exactly what we thoughtfully chose, human targets keep moving. Success is almost always relative, it's never absolute, purely because our minds are literally designed to keep measuring. The philosopher Robert Nozick created this famous thought experiment called the experience machine. He asked, if you could plug into a machine that perfectly simulated the feeling of writing a great novel or having immense status, would you do it? Most people say no. And why is that? Because we don't just want the isolated, simulated feeling of pleasure or success. We demand that our success be anchored in a real, shared world. Our emotional well-being strictly requires authentic social grounding with other human beings. Part 5. Our place in the world, triangulating the self. And that brings us to the ultimate, perhaps most unnerving realization about human existence. Back in the 18th century, the philosopher David Hume made a deeply unsettling observation. He wrote, "When I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception." Deep down, what Hume is pointing out is that there is no solid, permanent self to be found inside us. There's no hard anchor. We are just a fleeting, continuous collection of experiences and perceptions. Think about the profound implication of that for a second. If we truly lack a solid, fixed core, we're essentially adrift. And so human beings must constantly triangulate their coordinates using the people around them. Because we lack that solid core, we have to rely on the reflections of others to prove we exist, to prove our worth, to figure out exactly where we stand. It's like a GPS relying on satellites. Which leaves us to ponder this final, haunting reflection. Do humans constantly compare themselves to others because they're searching not only for status, but for their very place in the world? Perhaps our deepest insecurities and our absolute worst envies aren't character flaws at all. Perhaps they're simply the echoes of our own consciousness, desperately trying to find a home in a reality we have no choice but to share with others.